Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast. I'm Ruben Pinder and today I'm joined by JJ Bull.
Keep on trucking.
And John McKenzie.
Do you know who I'm really looking forward to talking about today? Adam Wharton. I can't wait to talk about Adam Wharton.
I have a correction to make as well. I've compared Atletico Madrid to like a snapping turtle. I think it's actually more like a ferocious wild cat that protects its young. So it lives in a cave in my head, lives in a cave on a mountain, and it protects the young from the outside of the cave and then attacks when it needs to. So it will go into the village to take, children or other animals, whatever, and then take it back to the cave, but then it protects the young.
What a trailer that is for what we spoke about today. Today we spoke about the outsiders for Champions League qualification, the non-traditional sides. 4 of them specifically. Nottingham Forest, are they highly evolved? Tactical slugs, and should they become a horse? What else did we speak about? Brighton and Hove Albion going well in the league, but now definitely out of the FA Cup after losing to Forest on penalties. Fingerless oven gloves feature heavily before we play the separation game. There's a sentence I never thought I'd read out loud. Then we talk about Fulham, who are another side doing well in the league with a disappointing cup exit. And John's favourite Premier League team, AFC Bournemouth, and their chaotic football. And can the Cherries reach the top of the Champions League cake? Steve, that's so bad. Then we played Points Are Bad. And that's about it. But yeah, we didn't get to speak about Adam Wharton, which is a shame. Did you see his pirouette against Fulham?
I did, yeah. Saying that you never thought you'd say that fingerless oven gloves led into the thing implies that you have thought about fingerless oven gloves in the past. That you didn't think you'd say
only as of half an hour ago.
The concept of fingerless gloves is an interesting one, isn't it? Because it is basically
I never understand fingerless gloves, yeah.
It's saying the cold part of your hand's actually the palm. And the fingers...
They're the bits that get the coldest.
Yeah, they are. And weirdly, with the rise of touchscreen mobile phones, you see fingerless gloves less frequently.
People just wear normal gloves or nun gloves. Why can't people use phones?
Do you say non-gloves?
Yeah.
Isn't that just not wearing gloves?
Well, that's gloves for nuns.
Oh, right.
Nun
okay.
gloves.
Who use ovens. Nun-vins. Gloves. Why do people have to use a phone? You know how a phone, they developed it over a period of time where you'd hold it so the speaker goes in your ear and then the microphone would be by your mouth, so you hold it like a phone.
Yeah.
Which is weirdly, doesn't look like a phone holding. Why does everyone hold it up now?
They do that.
So I can hear the whole conversation.
It's incredible how many people I've seen on public transport recently having FaceTime calls without headphones.
Yeah, if you do that, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But
people are well within their rights to talk to the person on the phone while you're having that conversation, I think. Is that unreasonable?
What, to butt into their conversation?
If I go on like FaceTime or I have a speaker call on my phone in the office, and you can hear fully what's going on, everyone just pretends they can't hear it, but you can hear it. So you'd be like, "Oh, who's that? What's that?" You could do that.
Yeah, you could do that. But I don't want to allow another intro
to get stabbed.
Well, that too. I also don't want to allow another intro to derail into London's transport system.
Oh, I see.
Because we do that a lot.
They do get mad when we talk about London transport.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when I went to Fulham away on Saturday,
you went by boat.
I went by boat. I got the Uber boat from east to west.
That's really cool.
It was really nice.
You didn't hire a boat.
No.
Isn't that the Millwall fans did that for something?
Yeah, probably. You just tap in. I say that I'm doing exactly what I said. I just didn't want to do. Yeah, you tap in with the Oyster card thing, and then it takes about an hour and 20 minutes to get from Surrey Quays to Putney.
It takes an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's not as quick as the tube, but it's the experience. It's the journey.
The Uber boats go quite quickly.
Is that a some trip along the Thames?
Yeah, but it does go quite quick.
They pull out really quickly and then they slow down. Anyway, enjoy the show. There's only 10 points currently separating Bournemouth in 10th and Nottingham Forest in 3rd, which means we're probably going to get more than one non-traditional team, or maybe more than one non-traditional team qualifying for the Champions League this season. So today we're going to talk about the teams in contention for that qualification, bearing in mind that 5th place in the Premier League will almost certainly get Champions League qualification for next season. So should we start with Forest? They beat Brighton in the FA Cup this weekend, so they're through to the semi-finals as well, and still somehow flying high in 3rd. They seem a dead cert for Champions League football, don't they?
You seemed very gleeful that Brighton had got knocked out of the...
I prefer not to speak. I didn't pay attention to that game at all, actually. I was more focused on the other one. They're doing well, though.
Yeah, doing well, and they continue to roll on. I think it's an interesting one because I think teams like that you always feel as though they're going to drop away towards the end of the season.
It's a bit like Leicester, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I think that there's things about Forest where at the beginning of the season I think they did sort of get the rub of the green a lot. Things went well for them. They came out the right side of results. Also, like little things would go their way, like whenever they played against teams, often their best player wouldn't be available, etc. I think little things like that which can give you a little bit of a momentum. But I think what I've been quite impressed by is how they've actually developed through the season. So initially I was kind of quite critical of Forest's sort of fairly passive out of possession approach, where they were just like, we're not going to be super aggressive in the first few lines of a press. We'll let the opposition often progress the ball quite easily, and then we'll rely on the fact that we're able to box defend with players like Murillo and Milenkovic, and they can bring Morato on late in games if they're ahead, and they'll just rely on their ability to box defend really well, which is obviously it's a football skill to be able to do that.
Yeah, you can do that.
It's maybe not as efficient as you might want it to be, but I think as time has gone on through the season, they have started introducing a little bit more activity in the first few lines of their press. I think against City they were very good at limiting City's build up, and I think against a team like City, that if you allow them to camp around your box, they will eventually score when they've got players as skillful as Haaland, Foden in different ways, and then De Bruyne and Foden in different ways as creative forces, but then Haaland as a striker, inevitably you will probably get chipped away at. And I thought in that game they did a really good job of just making sure that City couldn't just arrive in those positions super easy as well. So I've been quite impressed with them, I think, in terms of being able to add maybe a little bit more variety to their approach, particularly out of possession. And then in possession, obviously, they have just incredible direct attackers, and at the moment in the Premier League, direct attacking seems to be a pretty efficient and repeatable way of generating chances. So
it will be interesting to see how they fare in Europe when they're having come third this season. If they do come third, let's predict that, how they change in their style and how other teams change in their approach against them, because you made the Leicester comparison, JJ, and it has been reminiscent of that at times when they've sat back and blitzed teams on the counter. Obviously, as John explains, they've evolved a bit, but Leicester seem to be consistently underestimated that entire year. But then the following season, when they kind of had the expectations of being a better team, that jump is quite difficult when the whole perception of the team changes, isn't it?
Yes. And I think what I think is really is that when teams like that ride momentum, and then when you lose it, it's very hard to get it back. And so when you start a new season, or even you come back from an international break, you often think that's when some teams like Forest or Leicester would fall apart, But I think because they start the next season, you have different players because you add things in. I think they sold Mahrez, didn't they, straight after, and they sold Kante straight after. So
I think Kante went straight away. Yeah, Mahrez actually stuck around for a year or two.
Did he?
Yeah.
Are we sure?
Yeah.
Oh. Did he definitely?
Yeah. He joined City in 2018. Yeah.
Well, I'm totally wrong then. But yeah, I think that momentum does fall away. Also, losing Kante is obviously enormous because he was one of the best players in the entire world at the time.
On the momentum thing, I think often these teams who sort of pop up from the mid-table, they do just enjoy a little bit of variancing upwards, and then all that it takes is for that to stop happening, and then you end up back in the mid-table as well. So I think a lot of people will make the argument that now it's because they've got Europe or whatever, but it could just be as simple as the fact that their results start matching what you might expect a little bit more from the underlying numbers as well. And on top of the fact that I guess teams will find ways of causing Forest problems, like you were saying with Leicester, when you go into that second season where that teams start approaching in a completely different way, don't they? Because they're like, this is a team who achieved something last season, so now we have to we have to take that into account. And I think as well, the Premier League is at the moment a fairly unforgiving league in terms of the tactics. And if you find some kind of outlier advantage in some way, analysts just spend the summer breaking you down. Teams will have played them twice now, so they'll have a decent sense of where the problems are going to be caused by and where you can and how you can cause them back. So it often you bring all of that stuff together, and it means that you necessarily do get a little bit compressed in the following season.
Personnel-wise, do you think they have a good basis to evolve their style against the teams who are kind of working them out, as it were, in the summer? Do you know what I mean?
Forest.
Yeah, I think like Murillo is great with the ball. I know that him and Milinkovic have had to do a lot of kind of deep defending, but the wingers are very technical. There's a couple of upgrades in kind of technicality, and
what's kind of interesting, it's like
should be fine now.
It's like assuming that every team is evolving to become like Man City, like that's the way evolution works. Whereas actually, a slug is very evolved. If you've ever listened to Ricky Gervais' podcasts in the past, they're pretty good. They're as evolved as like a horse, but they're obviously very different.
What does that mean? They're as evolved as a horse.
Well,
they've gone through the same amount of evolution.
Evolution, yeah. So like the slug is, it's evolved perfectly for its surroundings to be what it is. It's not trying to become a horse. Yeah,
maybe
it's just a slug.
Maybe it would enjoy.
I think it should. They look rubbish, and I think they should look like horses.
It would be so much more fun to run through the fields with the wind in your mane than get stood on.
But then
on a pavement.
Ignorance is bliss, so perhaps not knowing that you have a happier life, but just being on the floor in Streatham.
That's true.
Much like Nottingham Forest fans would not appreciate if they open up and become more like a horse, they would suddenly lose more games or be more vulnerable.
It's the tricky thing though, isn't it? It's like it is the Moyes conundrum, right? Which is if you can get your upside by being like a decent defensive counter-attacking team, then where do you go from there? Do you just simply say, well, season on season, we just hope that we'll have some seasons where we do better relative to what you might expect of our level? And I guess, West Ham went through that phase of being like, now we're too big for Moyes. Oh, no, now we're not too big for Moyes. Please come back and save us. Oh, no, we're too big for Moyes again, etc. And I guess the question would be, like, what do Forest do? I mean, I guess for Forest, like, their expectations at the beginning of the season were avoid relegation, and they've certainly done that. So I'm sure they won't be sort of ripping up the copybook and being like, now we are a Champions League side, but it is kind of interesting to think about where teams go after having achieved like the best case scenario for them ahead of the season, looking into the next season. But I guess they'll just say, well, for us again next season, the challenge is to avoid relegation, and which is weird for a
But that will be harder with Champions League football.
Yeah,
they'll still
if they get Champions League football, suddenly the caliber of player they can bring in is higher. They can probably shop in a different market. But then, I was reading, I think over the weekend, I think the comparison now is that a lot of teams now are just trying to do, like the big teams with all the money, like Man United, will have to do what like Bournemouth and Forest have been doing. So they have to shop for someone in the Kirkes left back market rather than going for who's the biggest left back in the world now?
Alphonso Davies.
Him, yeah. That sort of thing. So that's kind of what you're looking at now. So I mean, Forest, if they could bring in, that's obviously a good team. You don't want to disrupt it. I don't think they'll lose anyone from it. So then you can add probably 2 key players. So you can spend all the money you're going to bring in to try and raise the floor and the ceiling a little bit. Both of them, just make your house bigger, I suppose. Because if you bring the floor up, you have to make the ceiling bigger, I suppose. Otherwise, you'd be squashed. You feel like your house is getting smaller.
You need floor raising as well as ceiling raising.
Yeah.
But
then your house just keeps going up.
Yeah. You don't actually have a bigger house. You just have a slightly elevated house.
Yeah.
That's what Saudi Arabia are doing with that city in the sky.
Yeah.
Which is probably good in a climate change environment.
The taller up you are, I guess, the more safe you are.
The further away you are from the inevitable destruction that is heading our way.
Although then there's the pitfall that you could fall out of it.
Yeah.
And it'd be harder to get into.
It's trade-offs, isn't it? It's the same with everything in football. Everything's about trade-offs. You might not drown, but you might fall out of your
death by ladder. Yeah.
People will probably hate this, but if you look at the expected numbers this season, Forest have picked up around 12 points, 13 points more than you might have expected them to do on their performances. That's just going off underlying numbers, so obviously it's completely meaningless. But if you reverse that and say they underperformed by the same amount that they'd overperformed, they would currently be just above the relegation zone. So that's not to say anything like they've been lucky or whatever, but going into next season, if they have that downturn of fortune that comes, that maybe would be prompted by having more fixtures and having to travel a lot around Europe with a squad that hasn't been primarily built for that, then it's not like outside of the world of possibility that they do struggle next season. And I guess that's the way that you look at it. You say, it's an overperformance of the season. It's not necessarily reconfiguring who we are as a team.
I think we should have a dedicated section of this show where you just put pins
Misery.
in people's dreams.
Yeah, but this is the way that clubs think, right? It's very easy for people to get annoyed about like barefaced pragmatism and misery, but like that's the way that you have to feel as a team. And there's so many examples of teams who haven't done that, and they've sort of been caught out by it. I mean, the classic example is the Marcelo Bielsa Leeds team in that first season where they got 56 points or whatever, finished mid-table in just after promotion, and then everything went wrong from there on in. And I think that's just the reality, is that no one has ever solved the Premier League. Like Man City this season have shown that you can win 6 in a row and then suddenly look like you've no idea what you're doing, right? So I guess that's the attitude that clubs will have. Fans will hate it, but like that's the reality.
But it's a business though, yeah. There's the thing, it's like, when teams bring in a new player or have a new thing they're going to do next season, like we're going to play this certain way, it's like a business putting a new product or service out, like oven gloves without the end of the gloves on, because it makes you more dynamic, and therefore this product
fingerless
will sell.
oven gloves.
Yeah, so you're making this thing that will really help.
It's a bold invention.
Well, they think it's going to work, but it's like bringing in this is harsh, but like bringing in Jadon Sancho. It doesn't do what you need to do. Most of it works, but the bit you need, like the goals and assists, is the fingers.
I mean, you put a screw in the wrong bit of an IKEA flat pack, and then the whole thing is just compromised.
So that again, you put a screw into
in the wrong bit of like an IKEA flat pack furniture.
Well, like the middle of the wood.
Well, you or you just you put
that would ruin it.
One screw in the wrong bit, and then the one that should have gone in there in a different bit, and then the whole thing is just.
Homer Simpson's barbecue.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It does feel like we're like focusing on what could go wrong, but I think that's so often the case. So often, what's most interesting to me about football is, okay, this is working now, but like, where is the potential?
It's why I like those underlying numbers, because you can't say this is definitely what should have happened, but it's a way to sort of gauge where things maybe should have been. I mean, the most obvious close example to me this season is Aberdeen being wildly good at the start of the season. People have probably seen that, where they won like 15 games in a row or something like that, and then all of a sudden just fell off a cliff or fell out the balcony, and so they've plummeted to the floor, and they spent about 13 games falling from the top of their house. And so then eventually it balances out, and it's just like there was a massive overperformance, then there was a massive underperformance, which is, I've rarely seen such wild variance in a single season. Yeah. But that's exactly what happened, and now it's leveled out, so now they're roughly where they should be, and the numbers that were there all along are kind of where they are. And so I think with Forest, they've benefited obviously because Spurs and Man United had definitely they jumped out of the balcony. They tried to land in the pool or something like that, and that has gone badly. So there's 2 spots that are absent. Villa, I guess, had a small drop because of maybe you'd say Champions League football.
Europe,
yeah. So you've got that argument as well. Excuse me. And so there's that small gap where Forest can break into it, and because they then had that really great, I think they had a good start, right? So you start well, you ride the momentum. That means you gain this once in a possibly generation chance to get into Champions League and change the club forever, and they've been building towards that, and it's just all lined up. It doesn't always line up, but that's why football is really fun, because you can do all the planning for your product launch that you want, but you don't know if suddenly you didn't realise that you don't need ovenless gloves. Yeah.
Fingerless.
Ovenless gloves do exist, actually. I believe gloves.
Most gloves come without ovens.
Yeah, I think that's
and that's why the fingerless oven gloves don't work, because you could just use other gloves for it, and they'd be equally as useful as the fingerless oven gloves. You should use oven gloves for ovening.
How would their style work in the Champions League?
We think? Sorry.
Forest in the Champions League. Do you think their tactical style would be a good fit? Like, what are the different challenges that they might face if they try to play the same way in Europe?
Gone quite deep in the FA Cup, I guess. Yeah. So, in principle, from a tactical point of view, I suppose that everything is there. The question is just like one of level, right?
It worked, yeah. I mean, say they play against Real Madrid and then they're sitting back, and then Real Madrid can't break them down. They hit them on the break. Perfect example of how that might really work. But then you play against, let's name a team, Barcelona. And you sit back all game through, and then eventually Lamine Yamal just pings one in from 30 yards. Then it doesn't work. But it's not that it doesn't work. It's just a style of making it work, I think. I guess it's really if they can create chances and block the other team out. And I think they've shown that it does work.
I mean, Atletico Madrid have got a pretty decent record in Europe.
That's
of
a good
getting quite
comparison,
far.
yeah.
And into just kind of going back to the evolution conundrum that we were kind of speaking about earlier of how you kind of make that step and if you even need to. Atletico Madrid, I've said a few times, are that team that try to evolve, decide that they were better at the other thing, and then they kind of evolve back, all the time. So you can kind of play a defence first, let the other team have the ball style. It doesn't have to be...
I keep being told this argument with Real Atletico Madrid. I don't know if they do that, honestly. I think they just sort of change roughly with the players they bring in. It gives them different options because you have to change a little bit. I don't know if they try and be more... I don't think they ever try and be... maybe turn into a horse, I think they stay with what they are, which is...
snails.
A turtle, maybe? But like a snapping turtle. They're like a snapping turtle. And so they play with that because it works perfectly for them in the pond that they're in. But they're not. If you put them on the grass, they're not going to be able to race. So when they stick to that kind of works. But if they're against a smaller, weaker creature, then they can outrun that on the grass. I'm sure this works somehow. But then that's I don't think
you
they
might be
change
right.
that much.
Yeah,
This season I've told a lot.
Maybe I'm clinging to the fact that it's mainly like when they signed a couple of flary attackers.
You think they're going to change?
Yeah, like João Felix. Now it doesn't work, and then they kind of...
Well, this is my point before. So they can bring in like two key star ones. I don't know who they would be, what market they could really bring in, because it might just be a flash in the pan with this season, I keep saying got to stop doing that. But if you bring in a player who is amazing, like Antoine Griezmann, so Atletico play that sort of defensive, really like aggressive, intense pressing football, but they drop deep and they don't let you anywhere near them and then they block you out. But they do it with some of the best players in the world. Like Antoine Griezmann is one of those. And so if you have those, something much better. Chris Wood obviously having a phenomenal season. Love Chris Wood. But if you had a player who can create goals out of nothing, then in addition to the stuff he already does, then you would benefit.
Yeah, I suppose the unique element with Atletico is Simeone's ability to get elite players to buy into that style, right? Which not every player of that level of quality would want to play that style.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Do you know the story about Fulham nearly signing Antoine Griezmann, but not signing him in the end?
I do not know the story.
Well, they nearly signed him, and then they didn't.
This when was this? When he was at Real Sociedad?
Let me find the story. Talk amongst yourselves.
I like Antoine Griezmann.
Yeah, me too. Tell the audience that stat you told us.
The stat that I saw is that according to something on the internet, Antoine Griezmann has now overtaken Lionel Messi for the most La Liga appearances by a non-Spanish player.
That is very impressive.
It's good at that, isn't it?
Back in 2014, Fulham had a chance to buy Griezmann for £12 million. Not only did Fulham not spend £12 million on Griezmann, in case you forgot, they then went and spent £12 million on Olympiacos striker Kostas Mitroglou instead.
Oh, in January 2014. I was going to say, because that season they went down.
It's a different profile of player.
And obviously,
tactics.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Griezmann in 2014 is very different from Griezmann 11 years into the future. So, it shouldn't be that surprising that a team were interested in an up-and-coming player.
That was his last season at Real Sociedad before he went to Atletico Madrid.
Right.
Yeah. Who was Fulham manager at the time?
Felix Magath.
I actually think it was Felix Magath.
Yes.
Yeah, well done. So Forest are going to get the Champions League, and then who knows what's going to happen.
The problem with league tables is that you lose 3 games in a row and suddenly you're not in the same position anymore. And
well, that's especially true right now because there's such a small gap. I look at the Premier League table and I see Bournemouth in 10th and I go, I thought they were pushing for Champions League places. And then I look at the points totals and I go, they still are. But we're not going to talk about them yet. Let's move on to Brighton, who are also in the mix. They are currently 7th, 2 points off 4th. But they went out of the FA Cup this weekend to the aforementioned Forest.
The erstwhile Forest.
Yes, and there's a possibility, it's been posed, I suppose, I don't really buy into this, that Brighton should have tried to keep players back from the international break, an insult to international football really, since it was a very rare opportunity to get into the FA Cup semis. Now, they did have, I don't have the graphic in front of me, but they had a lot of players travelling a lot of miles in the international break leading into this cup campaign. Does that make a difference?
I think probably a lot of difference, yeah, because it is tiring doing that, and you don't know how rested they are when they're coming back and stuff like that. But also, when those players are away, the coaching staff are still in Brighton, and they have a group of players who they can work with, so they can develop things specifically for that game to plan it really well. So you probably get some advantage there, and then you can bring other players in and hope that it's not too much of a problem just dropping them in. You've got a squad of players; they should all be able to do it.
I suppose it's just part of the trade-off that it's what you sign up for when you buy. If you buy South American players and want to improve them to get to the level that you can then sell them for lots of money, which is essentially Brighton's model, and then they're going to get international call-ups, and then they're going to fly halfway around the world during the international breaks, and you kind of know that's going to happen.
Well, did Mitoma play? Because he's Japanese. That's quite far.
Yeah, he went a long way. So did Chris Wood, because obviously
Chris Wood got injured as well.
He got injured, yeah.
So it's something like 23,000 miles, I think, for Wood. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. The way that I was thinking about this is like, as I understand that players often want to play for their national side more than maybe people would expect them to,
or more than the fans of, let's say, Brighton Hove Albion would.
But I was trying to consider how you would judge the So this is the possibility for these teams is that they will have probably the best chance they'll ever have, really, of give or take Man City winning the FA Cup. And so what I thought I would do is just take like a replacement level player and have a look at the things that they won through their career. So I looked at Glenn Murray. I was like, Glenn Murray, like a sort of classic, that kind of player who is playing for a team where you're probably not going to win much in your career. Anyone want to guess what he won in his career?
Nothing.
Football League 2.
Yeah.
That's good.
2005-06. And then he was in the playoffs with Palace in 2013.
He got Brighton promoted from League One, went
Football
to Palace.
League 1, yeah, so 2010-11.
And then came to Palace.
And that's it.
Promoted with them in 2013 and nothing else.
And, you know, I guess, and Glenn Murray also didn't have any international caps. So I guess if you were to offer, the question is, if you were to offer him the possibility of having an FA Cup or an England cap, which one would he choose? That said, for a lot of these players, you know, this is just one international game. And I guess you can argue that someone like João Pedro, for example, would want to actually be solidifying his chances of playing for Brazil, and so wouldn't want to miss a chance to play for them. But I don't know, someone like Karu Mitoma, for example, a regular for Japan. Like, there's plenty of examples from the past of like managers pulling players out of international duty because of injuries.
I suppose it depends on the game that you've got to play, right? I know everyone wants to say that the international break just gone was meaningless friendlies, but loads of them were playing World Cup qualifiers, or there's CONCACAF Nations League, UEFA Nations League, which again is not like as prestigious as the tournaments that they all want to play in, but the federations will take the qualifiers very seriously. If it's friendlies, I think maybe don't fly 15,000 miles.
And it's never as simple as like, here's one thing, here's another thing. Pick which one you prefer, because I think often in football as well, it's quite hard to make that choice, especially when it comes to like footballers' health, right? If the option is playing football now versus maybe having debilitating like physical issues for the rest of your life, they're obviously going to pick play now, right? And so the ability to make those kind of decisions isn't just an easy one. But I do wonder how many footballers will get to the end of their career and look back and think, oh, I wish we'd won that game against Forest, because that was probably the best chance we had of maybe winning something on our in our career. But then again, that's the difficulty, right? It's because I'm sure all of these footballers are like, well, it doesn't matter because I will win something at some point, or I will move to a club which will win something at some point. It's very hard to make those kind of judgment calls.
Yeah, they're not in the same space to judge because they need the ego and drive to believe that they will win something anyway, right?
Yeah.
The other thing with this thing, what players did Brighton really even rest for this game? Because Welbeck started, so they didn't have Pedro on from the start. They had Rutter starting, he always starts. Minte always starts. Mitoma always starts. Baleba is one of their key players. Ayari plays quite a lot. Estupiñán is fantastic.
So they played a very strong team.
Webster,
Carlos
is the first team.
Baleba wasn't starting.
Yeah, he did.
Where he started.
He started.
So
that's their first team apart from the striker.
They showed the graphic on the BBC. So basically, Estupiñán, Mitoma, Baleba and Minto were in the top, 6 players for distance travelled in international duty, whereas obviously Forest were able to, most of their players in that top 6 didn't play. Chris Wood has comfortably the most air miles in that time, but didn't play. It was only Murillo and Ola Aina who put up a chunk of time. So, and again, yeah, I mean, the question is, is it the manager's responsibility to rotate those players around, which is what
Bournemouth had quite a lot of sub players come in, and they had a lot of energy in that game against Man City.
I think Bournemouth rotate quite well. They have to, because Antoine Semenyo has talked about this in interviews about. The manager will say to them, run as much as you can from the off, and if you need to, we can take you off after 60 minutes. So the idea is that, you're almost preparing yourself for a 60-minute game, and then you use your subs to mitigate any problems with that. But yeah, I suppose this comes down to the difference between Nuno resting players and going through, and Brighton not resting players and not going through. But yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment, certainly.
But Brighton more generally, 7th in the league, level on points with Newcastle. I'll just go through their run-in quickly. They've got Villa midweek, and then they go to Selhurst Park for that really esteemed rivalry that everybody respects. Brighton then play Leicester, Brentford, West Ham, Newcastle, Wolves, Liverpool and Spurs on the final day.
Liverpool, who will presumably already be champions at that point.
They'll be at the beach.
They'll be on the beach.
On the beach, sorry.
They may be at the beach.
They
may be on the beach.
Yeah. Right. Steve just gave a rude gesture through the glass, pointed at me for some reason. It's something you said, so I'm just passing it on.
What, is he unhappy with the idea that Arsenal are out of the title challenge? Sorry.
There's always hope, John. There's always hope.
Yeah, let me tell you how much hope there is, actually, because I've got the Opta table up here. Arsenal have a 0.89% chance of winning the league, so there is still hope. It's less than 1%.
So you're saying there's a chance?
It's a higher probability than winning the lottery.
Do you want to guess who Opta predict will finish in the top 5?
Yeah. Where have they put Brighton? Where's Brighton's most likely place to finish while we're on them?
7th.
Ah, okay. But that would be Europa League, no?
Yeah, that would be a good season for them, I think. It's not very exciting if you look at the Opta table, because it is just Man City in 4th.
Nerds have ruined everything.
They have Man City in 4th, Newcastle in 5th, Chelsea in 6th. Actually, that's kind of fun, because they looked for a period like Chelsea might actually get top 5, but then they sort of plateaued a bit, didn't they?
They've got anti-momentum, which would be...
Anti-momentum.
Tom.
Downtum. No.
Unmentum.
Unmentum.
That'll do.
So Brighton will get into the Europa League. And who's going to win the cup?
Who's left?
Palace, Villa, Forest, City.
No, obviously Palace.
Correct answer. You go. Okay, that's enough about them. Should we play the separation game?
Yes.
Yes. Right, today's separation game, we're going to start with Les Ferdinand. That was Steve's idea. And then I did some Wikipedia travelling and landed on Ross Barkley.
Ross Barkley.
So get me from Les Ferdinand to Ross Barkley. We're going to take a break now while these two scurry around transfer marked. See you in a minute. All right, they both claim to have a route from Les Ferdinand to Ross Barkley. JJ claimed to have finished it first. That doesn't always mean he's got it. JJ, take it away.
Well, I don't like it when I make them stay at one club for a long time, but I can do it. I don't know how many steps this counts as.
Okay.
So Les Ferdinand
was
the one you said at first, wasn't it? Yeah. So he played at Newcastle alongside Steve Watson.
I don't know who Steve Watson is, but I believe
he was an excellent right back. He had ginger hair. You'd remember him. He went to Everton, and then at Everton he played there for a while, especially at the same time as Tim Cahill, who was also there for ages at the same time as Ross Barkley broke through. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 players, or 2 between Ferdinand and Barkley.
I think
did Cahill and Barkley play in the same Everton team?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they did.
Barkley was there for ages, 2010 to 2018. Yeah. I think people care too much about making the distances between players short for us, because we get like 2 minutes to find the links with wild Google searches, whereas other people sit for hours thinking about it.
Yeah. If you want to find it...
you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Obviously,
you could have done it in one. Obviously, Paul Konchesky or whatever it was.
Obviously,
Riyad
Paul
Mahrez.
Konchesky went to university with Ian McKellen, and he thought about someone else once. Anyway, the route that I went was Les Ferdinand played with Clark Carlisle at Watford.
He did well. Now, Les Ferdinand was a Watford player, but he made 0 league appearances for
He was
them.
there.
Okay, fine.
They played in training.
Yeah, and maybe in a cup, I didn't check.
Clark Carlisle played with Aaron Lennon at Leeds.
Oh, right.
Aaron Lennon played with Ross Barkley at Everton.
Did
So
he?
Both got 2.
Yeah, he did. Probably.
That's actually not that bad. I thought it was.
Steve's looking at me like Aaron Lennon didn't play for Everton, which he definitely did.
He did for a long time.
I checked all of this out. He played between 2015 and 2018.
And Ross Barkley joined
And Ross-
Chelsea in
2018. Well, it was
2018.
2010 to 2018.
Okay, yeah,
so.
there you go. Well done, boys. My route that I had written down was that Les Ferdinand played for Big Sam's Bolton in 04-05. And there he played with Kevin Nolan, who played at Newcastle with Danny Simpson, who played at Leicester with N'Golo Kante, who played at Chelsea with Ross Barkley. That was a fun one.
Oh, I could do an even better one, though.
Yeah.
Can I just improve mine a little bit?
Go on.
So Steve Watson at Newcastle to Everton, he played at the same time as Thomas Gravison,
Oh, nice.
who went to Real
Are you
Madrid.
going to take us on a long loop?
Did
Yeah.
Gravison overlap with Barkley?
No.
No, but he would overlap with a player. I could probably go back and forth in Real Madrid with some Spanish teams, and then I would get to Marco Asensio, and then I get him to Aston Villa
Yeah, nice.
with Barkley. That would be a better way to do
I do
it.
think we should add.
Sergio Ramos from Gravison to Asensio.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like we should
Nice.
do via.
Yeah, we should put a
We
VAR
should
in.
do a VAR.
Do we change the VAR every week?
I don't like it when I do the same club too long. That makes it boring.
I guess
It's
the
more
problem
fun
with the
than that.
VAR is that all you're doing then is just 2 different separations and joining them up.
Yeah, but James Milner played with everybody, so he could be the Kevin Bacon of the separation game, couldn't he?
That's true.
Well, jolly good job. I don't speak like that. Why did I say that? It was better than
Sitting
some
in
weeks.
Joe's chair, aren't you? So
Yes.
At least you're self-aware. I like it.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
try to be. Now, one team Ross Barkley definitely didn't play for yet is Fulham, who were knocked out of the FA Cup this weekend, humiliated, some might say, in a 3-0 defeat to Crystal Palace at Craven Cottage. But their league form has been excellent. Now, Steve has not put where they are in the league in the script for me.
8th.
They are 8th
On 45 points.
on 45. So
Same as Aston Villa, 2 below Brighton, 2 below Newcastle, 3 below Man City.
can they climb into the Champions League?
If they win all their games, then yes.
Mm-hmm. And
If they lose them, then I think no.
do we think they are
And if they draw them.
equipped to win the majority of those games that would need them?
I think, ish. I don't. They're much better than I think they should be, and I think that is because Marco Silva has done a great job there. And there are various things you could analyse to look into what that is and what he has done.
Like the football.
But the football they play, yeah.
Yeah.
You can analyse the football that they play. But he gets an awful lot out of players who might have had different careers had they stayed at bigger clubs, but didn't quite cut it. And then they're doing very well as a unit.
You're saying
Football.
they were a slug, but they could have been a horse.
I think
He turned them into beautiful horses.
I think they were. What's a less drastic version of a caterpillar into a butterfly? Like Charmander into Charizard, but that's not a real animal. So that'd be good if it was, though. Like a little nice, friendly.
Dragon.
Dragon.
They're dragon based, aren't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
It's a dragon. They're a dragon.
Fulham are a dragon.
Yeah.
Are they good?
I mean, yeah, they're obviously good. I think every team in the Premier League is good, give or take the bottom 3. But and I think that there's no managers in the league now really who aren't deserving of their place there. I do think that I agree with JJ in that like a big part of this it comes down to just setting up a solid tactical foundation and then the word that everyone loves to use at the moment, profiling players to fit within that system. And I think that Marco Silva has done a good job of getting that right. So, for example, someone like, if you've got someone like Anthony Robinson in your team, using him in a certain way that gets the most out of him, right? So not starting with a top-down view of tactics, which is this is how my team are going to play, but using a bit more of a bottom-up approach where you're saying, well, these are the players I've got at my disposal. This guy can do this thing well, which actually complements this other guy that I have. So let's do that. And I think some of the interesting things that Fulham do, I think they arrive in the box in the half spaces of the penalty area. In the same way that I think Newcastle do this quite nicely as well. Mark Carey has a piece on The Athletic right now, just talking about some of the things that Fulham are doing. He talks about the way that they use these wide triangles to move the ball in the wide areas. And I think that does allow them to arrive in quite dangerous positions in the penalty area half space, which sounds like a very ridiculous thing to say, but basically wide in the penalty area with the ball on the floor, which allows them to then do these cutbacks, which can be quite productive. They're also very good when it comes to crossing. Some really interesting things show up if you look at the data there. Namely, like Fulham are really, I think they're top of the league when it comes to byline crosses. So they're doing those sorts of crosses that you don't feel like you see as much anymore.
Well, you're not allowed to do byline crosses anymore because you lot outlawed
because of
it.
woke, yeah. But basically, a couple of interesting things there. So they're finding those areas and they're playing those crosses into the box. And you would think, well, as a result of this, they're scoring a lot of these goals from crosses. Therefore, they must be overloading the box, right, with attackers when they get in there. Because if you do that, it raises your chances of scoring. But actually, they have some of the lowest numbers of teammates in the box when they cross, which seems weird, right? But if you marry that up with another metric, which is even more ridiculous than half-space penalty box areas, players arriving from the second line. So basically, this first line is your strikers, your forwards. Second line, usually your midfield. Actually, what Fulham are really good at is getting their midfielders into goal-scoring positions on crosses in the box in a much more dynamic way. So, for example, I think was it against Nottingham Forest recently where Emile Smith-Rowe scored back post header. And if you actually watch the way that goal unfolds, the ball goes down the wide areas. It's not actually a byline cross. It comes back inside to Adama Traore. He plays the ball into the box, but at the point at which he's received the ball, there's only Raul Jimenez in the box, and everyone else is basically outside it. But once he turns onto his foot, he's going to play the cross with and plays it into the back post. You can see then Emile Smith-Rowe making that dynamic run, and then he arrives. I think it's Morato, the defender. I'm doing this from memory, and it was a while back, so it may be wrong. Sometimes I am wrong. But because he arrives in that dynamic moment, he's able to beat a centre-back to the ball, and it makes it a much more dangerous prospect.
It's way harder to defend against when the player has momentum, right?
Yeah, and so you end up then with two benefits, one of which is that you're arriving in that moment dynamically, but the other thing is that you're not committing a huge amount of players into the box, so that if, when you're playing crosses into the box, it's a fairly low-stakes way of attacking, right? You're not necessarily going to create a chance from it. If you overload the box, then you're making yourself much weaker defensively. You're probably going to lose the ball, and if you overcommit, then you can get countered on as well. So they're able to maximise their efficiency on the cross and score goals from it without then compromising themselves defensively. So it's just little things like that where you actually think it through, and you're like, I can understand why with the players that he's doing these things. And actually, when you take them all together, you say, overall, it's like a smart way of playing, and it's nice to watch because it is, when we talk about football tactics, which we like to do, a lot of the time people only think of like top level football tactics, and so they'll say things that just become like low key elitist because they'll say things based on like the way that Barcelona are playing or the way that Real Madrid are playing, and they'll say things like, what we know now is that tactics, the future of football is no tactics. And you're like, okay, that's fine if you're talking about teams like Barcelona and Real Madrid, where they've got some of the best players of all time in the same team. Then you can make arguments that actually imposing structures on teams is going to
hinder them, maybe.
Yeah, maybe hinder them or not allow the players to be as reliant on their elite problem-solving capabilities than they could be. If you've got like, I don't know, Barry Smith up front and you're Rochdale, it's a completely different kettle of fish. Those players aren't going to be able to find the solutions as easily as Jude Bellingham or whatever. There's a famous clip with Thomas Tuchel where he's like, I'm not going to tell Kylian Mbappe what to do on the ball because he's always going to come up with better solutions than I could do. I'm not going to tell Marco Verratti how to build up. Obviously, that's the case. But I think the reality is that the majority of football is not played by elite players of that level.
Yeah, of course.
And so you need coaches like Marco Silva to implement these sort of baseline approaches, which allows the players to be better than the sum of their parts. Because when the sum of the parts aren't necessarily that impressive, you're definitely going to benefit from that tactical approach. Whereas if you're Real Madrid, even if the players are slightly worse than the sum of their parts, it doesn't matter because those parts are so elite that you're still going to end up with a really good football team. So
I always think with Marco Silva, well, I have thought this season that if he hadn't been at Hull and Everton before and he was a new shiny toy, then there would be more hype about him, and that the familiarity has maybe downplayed that this season. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's the difficulty of managing your career, and you have to take a bet on yourself at some point. So we got where did he go first? It was Everton, wasn't it?
Hull. He came in at Hull, and there was a lot of outrage because he'd never.
Then he jumped ship early. Yeah.
Well, he was like parachuted in to save Hull, and he'd won the league in Olympiacos, and the kind of punditocracy were like, well,
that's right. I remember this now. Yes, I remember that whole thing now. Yeah. So, but he went abroad he went to Olympiacos so he could win stuff, right? So, like, if you're looking for a manager, if you're looking for someone with a CV and a reputation or a history of winning things, go to a league where you can win stuff. Like Ange Postecoglou went to Celtic, so in a European league, he won the league with Celtic. That made him seem like he was really, really good, but he wouldn't take the jump on him when he'd done something in Japan. So Postecoglou.
Marco
Silva goes to
Marco Silva Arnold.
Yes, thank you. Marco Silva Arnold goes.
Trent, I like to call him Trent.
He goes to Olympiacos and then wins the league, which should be pretty easy to do. But now he knows how to win stuff. And all the things John's talking about there with the way that they play, like that's part of football tactics, or like the way a manager wants to play is they don't just have like a set style of playing. They've found things in their like playing career or by watching football that they think is actually the secret to how you score a goal. Like if you have someone arriving in the box at the right time, that's the best way to score. It's not just like getting the ball in the box, it's how you time it. Like some of the things I learned from looking at Brentford set pieces under the last set piece coach is how like the timing of the run is as important as the delivery, because like you've got set positions, but it's not just set position, it's set position at certain times and all the knock-on things. And that is again like really clever thinking outside of the box, and I like that sort of stuff.
And running into the box from outside the box.
Well, it's really important to do that, especially if you've raised the floor. And Fulham expected points are exactly where they should be, which is, I think, this is one of the things when the data is quite useful, because you're like, that's actually really impressive.
Presumably higher than where Forest would be.
Yeah, expected points. Forest are, I don't know how low they are. So they have a 41.86. So their actual is, what's
54, I think.
Yeah, so that's a big jump, right? So Fulham are kind of where they should expect to be. They're predicted in the Opta's model. Opta's got this as a supercomputer that you can never turn off.
It's a really good computer.
Yeah, well, maybe they will have to turn it off one day, but like if it's so super, surely it would figure out the best way to predict the Premier League is to just kill all humans.
To go and sit at the beach.
Well, if it kills all the humans, then it would know that the table will always be zero, so it would know exactly what the table would be. That's the most effective way.
The end point of the Opta supercomputer is the annihilation of the human race.
Yes, I do.
I wonder if they've taken that into account.
Oh, well, I certainly hope so.
Well, maybe
we can ask Duncan Alexander later.
Okay, let's do that.
I've just realised, thanks to Steve, that Marco
time is running out. Yeah,
Marco Silva.
The computer's here.
The computers are coming.
Hello, Ruben. It's time to go.
Marco Silva also managed at Watford, but then again, who didn't?
Pep Guardiola.
But speaking about like the underlying numbers, there is a good example of what we were saying before, which is like that doesn't denigrate what Forest have done. Obviously, Forest have earned the points that they have earned. They've had to go and win those games, but the underlying numbers gives you a bit more of a sense of whether or not you could expect these sorts of return on investment almost with the numbers. And I think that that in and of itself is an impressive thing, that they are sort of batting at the sort of level that they are at in the league, which is pretty good.
Exactly. You set everything up so you have the opportunity to do this, and if it all goes well, then you get a massive boost. It's a lot of clever planning and things going the right way.
And even if they have to sell Anthony Robinson, you hopefully find another left back who is maybe good at crossing, and if they're not as good at crossing or whatever Anthony Robinson is brilliant at, then you adapt the plan a bit. But
that's the point of bottom-up management, right? Is that you are then much more flexible, you're much more nimble on your feet, because you're like, well, now you do your best to sort of find some kind of replacement that you think will match what he was doing, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get that, because you can't just take your pick of everyone who's available.
And that flexibility then probably plays a bit into the perception, because managers who aren't associated with a clear style that they impose dogmatically, it's harder to talk about them, because you don't have that to kind of hang.
I just wish people would accept that, like, if you're a good mid-table manager, the logical next step isn't, oh well, a big team should therefore sign them, because it seems to me that the task of a mid-table manager is completely different to the task of an elite club manager. And yeah, sure, I'm sure some of these managers could overlap, and I'm sure often these coaches do sort of maybe coach themselves into a bit of a rut. But I don't think there's any shame in someone like Marco Silva never coaching at the highest level of the game, because he's still an elite version of a mid-table manager. And I think people downplay that too much.
Like some players are great at being a big fish in a small pond and don't adapt to the different environments at the very top.
Which brings us quite nicely to Andoni Iraola, right? Because that's the big question with him. Like, what level is he at? Is he just a very good mid-table manager, or can you scale his tactical approach up to the elite level?
Well, the Athletic have reported in recent days that he's top of Tottenham's list if they were to move on from Postecoglou, isn't he? But that would apparently be a step down according to this season, because Bournemouth are 4 places higher than Spurs on 44 points. So they're at the bottom of this non-traditional cluster that we're going through today. And they lost the FA Cup semi-final. But maybe that could help them in their push. John, they're your favourite team. So tell me why, or they will or maybe will not get into Europe this season.
I should clarify they're my favourite Premier League team.
You're not a proper Bournemouth fan. They are your favourite team in the Premier League.
Yes.
That's fine.
Just covering my back.
Are they the outsiders for Champions League football, or can you see them maybe climbing back up above some of the teams that we've spoken about earlier?
Yeah, I think the issue with Bournemouth isn't necessarily that they can't beat the big teams. I think what is tough to determine with Bournemouth is that people often only watch them when they're playing against the big 6 sides. And in those games, they're optimised to cause problems for those kind of teams, which I think means that most casual Premier League watchers might just watch them and think, oh, well, if they're causing problems for teams like, they've beaten Arsenal this season, they've beaten City this season, they've beaten Manchester United this season, etc. You go through the list. It seems logical then that they're obviously just blowing teams like Leicester, City or Wolves out of the way, and yet they've dropped points to both of those teams this season. In fact, lost to both teams this season. And it comes down to what we were talking about before about outlier advantage, which is when the biggest teams are set up to play in a certain way, you can set your own team up in a way that will cause that approach problems, which is like a good way of finding an advantage. Not everyone's necessarily going to do that, but I think the issue becomes that when they then play against these teams towards the bottom half of the table, the way that they're creating advantage is often by generating these chaotic game states, which they're better prepared than these other teams who like generally to control the ball more, because when you're winning games, it's beneficial for you to be able to control the ball more in whatever way. It could be generally through possession of the ball, but you can control games in other ways. But when you then play against teams at the bottom of the table, they're just much better suited to more chaotic game states, because they're not trying to necessarily possess the ball. Their players are probably better suited to out of possession approaches, or maybe optimised for physicality, things like that. And I think as a result of that, Bournemouth sort of end up, or have done this season, mid-table, because they have ended up dropping points in those kind of games. So yeah, for me, I think Bournemouth probably roughly where they will finish. And the big question is with Andoni Iraola is how do you scale that approach up? Because it's all well and good if you're not expected to win every game to be able to have outlier advantage in the way that they do. But when you're suddenly coaching Spurs and the expectation is you're going to be winning more games, but in winning game states more as well, suddenly you then have to have an approach to the game where you're able to manage those game states better, right? And I think that's one of the things that Bournemouth have struggled with a little bit this season. Interestingly enough, I think if you compare Bournemouth in games against the traditional big 6 versus everyone else, they've picked up more points per game against the traditional big 6 than they have against everyone else, which is...
That's wild.
Obviously, it's very close. It's 1.5 to 1.55. It's very, very close. But it's still a problem, I think, because when you are at Spurs, suddenly you're like, yeah, we want to compete with the teams around us at the top. but we have to be consistently beating these teams below us. We have to score goals and then maintain those positive game states. And the way that you do that generally is having some kind of in possession idea which allows you to control tempo more, take the sting out of the game. And the issue with Bournemouth is they rely so much on putting the sting in the game that in those moments when they go ahead, often they have to end up carrying on playing at that intense, slightly frenetic speed and tempo. And as a result, it can go both ways, right? Sometimes that can leave you open and you can get scored on. And
that's probably why they've been so entertaining for neutrals, right?
Yeah, because absolutely. And and Iraola's doing really interesting things, right? In and out of possession. It's a different way of playing. It's an interesting way of playing, but it's a results business. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this is that like it works for a mid-table team to play this way, right? Results-wise, but it wouldn't be good enough for a team like Spurs, I don't think. So the question is, could he start introducing those other control elements if he had better players available to him? And it can happen. I think it happened with Jurgen Klopp. I think he made that step up from Mainz to Dortmund and started introducing more of those ideas about being able to control games enough to bring them through. Did it again when he moved to the Premier League, and the context shifted slightly as well. Retained the unique aspects of his footballing philosophy. He was always, I would say, predominantly like about out of possession control more than anything. But you can still play that way and challenge at the top of the league. So the big question for me is, can Iraola make that step and be the next sort of Jurgen Klopp correlate? Maybe the football meta is moving away from that, but I personally think that it's probably moving slightly towards the more chaotic end of the spectrum. So yeah, watch this space.
And JJ, can Bournemouth chaos their way into the Champions League places, or are the aforementioned teams in a stronger position to stop them from doing that, do you reckon?
I mean, I don't want to give the same answer all the time where I just say if they win their games, then yes. They are. I like Bournemouth. I think they're good to watch. I think they're pretty smart. If they had better players, they'd be higher up. I think they underperform their expected numbers. I think they do anyway. Let's just double check that.
They're slightly underperforming this season.
Yeah, so their expected numbers have them like third in the table this season, which is pretty crazy. So one of the things with underlying numbers is that like really good players break those models. So Harry Kane will always score above his expected goals. And if Bournemouth had players that could perform over their expected goals or expected numbers underlying, then they would be much higher because they would actually convert those chances, especially rather than being under it. They'd be either level, which would put them in third, or they'd be above it, which would put them even higher up. But they don't have them just yet. So I think the job of Iraola is to have made them as good as they are. And
it's actually really surprising to hear that they are underperforming their underlying numbers.
They're finishing issues though, right?
Right. Is that it? In the games, like you mentioned, where they're not able to beat the bottom half teams that they really ought to be beating?
They generate chances, but then they don't finish them, and then that's what you need really good players for.
I also do wonder if there's an element to which when you like create chances in a chaotic way, it does make not the XG models work less well, but yes, I agree with JJ that like the quality of player that you have means that they're probably going to be less efficient finishers. But at the same time, if you're creating those in more chaotic moments, I think they are probably going to end up being more non-standard chances as well, which I think sort of raises questions about how well...
Kind of like the polar opposite to how like Man City would always create the same cutback chance.
Yeah,
like, it's just every shot it falls a bit differently, and therefore the players are kind of like adjusting to more circumstances.
A team like City are always going to like create... And again, so much, everything folds back on itself, right? Like a better player will be able to create a better chance for a teammate, not just in terms of like as a creative end in itself, but, the best players will... Another word that Tacticos uses is like empathy. And what they mean by that, like, so you might talk about passing empathy. And what they mean by that is not only are you putting the ball into the sort of spots for a teammate to be able to get a good chance, you're also trying to minimise the negative aspects of that. So you put it on their stronger foot, you roll it on the floor, you're able to pass it in such a way that it arrives at them at the perfect ball striking position. Things like that. And I think...
Or like good passing.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean? Like if you've got, I don't know... Marcus Tavernier like bobbling a pass across to you and it's arriving, and you've got players, everyone's running around, it's a bit chaotic, you're in a non-standard position, you're not generating the same chance over and over again. That chance does necessarily become harder than, as you say, the Man City cutback where the ball arrives perfectly onto the the stronger foot of an elite player. And I think that probably explains some of it as well. And I think as well they do generate like big chances quite regularly. But I think because the pressure is on those chances as well, it's like the aggregate of their XG can often be quite high because they'll generate like a couple of big chances. But I think that the pressure on those moments as well means that. It's that, and I'm getting into the weeds here, but like if you create like a lot of lower quality chances in the Premier League, that can actually be a good thing because the quality of player, as JJ said, is generally going to finish over their expected goals. Like the fact that you have 20 shots means that you have 20 chances of scoring, and if those chances of scoring are lower, you've still got chances of scoring, so you can overperform your expected goals in that way. Whereas, let's say Bournemouth create like 3 good chances and they miss 2 of them. That's going to produce 1 goal, which, you know, a team like Man City, if they get 20 shots, they're probably going to score 1 goal, right? So it ends up being exactly the same thing. I don't know if I'm explaining myself particularly clearly.
I know roughly
here,
where you're
like,
going.
Science is not perfect, basically.
Yeah, I'm just saying that. Yeah,
it's another reason the Optus supercomputer will destroy us all.
For us all.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap up this section, let's do a very quick prediction. It's just for fun, very quickly. Forest, Brighton, Fulham, and Bournemouth. Who's getting into the Champions League? 1, multiple, or none? And whom?
Forest
in the Champions League? None of the rest of them?
They're the one most likely to. I think City will climb up now and Chelsea will maybe fall out, but still around 5th. So, yeah.
Okay, just Forest. John?
Forest.
Just Forest.
I'm sorry.
That's dull, isn't it? Oh, well.
But the FA Cup's fun.
I love the FA Cup.
And hopefully City won't win. I hope that's not too biased to say, but like it would be nice to see.
Yeah, I can't get this idea out of my head since you said it a few weeks ago that even in the year when City are very subpar, they still come away with a cup and ruin the hopes and dreams of a fan base who never win anything.
I think I'm right in saying that there's not been a first-time winner of the FA Cup in this decade so far. I think there's a graphic in one of the Athletic pieces.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
It would be nice for that to happen.
Yes, it would. Let's take a break and then we'll play Points Are Bad. Oh, yes. That was a nice break, wasn't it? Aberdeen 4, Motherwell 1. That was one of JJ's picks for Points Are Bad this week. JJ, you predicted 1-0, so therefore added 4 points. Actual Seb predicted 2-1 and therefore added 2 points. Joe predicted 1-1, so adds 3. And I, as John, predicted 2-2 and therefore added 3.
You did a good job for me, I think, this week.
I tried my best. The other game that JJ chose was Hibs versus St Johnstone, which was a 3-0 win for the home side. JJ predicting 2-2, adding 3 points. Actual Seb predicting 3-0, adding 0. Perfect prediction for Seb Stafford Bloor. And Joe predicting 2-0, adding 1 point. And I, as John, predicted 4-1, adding 2 points. So that adds a total of 7 to your total, JJ. A total of 2 added to Seb's. Joe gains 4 and John gains 5. So a great week for Seb. But
actually, looking at it, you've not done a good job.
No, I've not done a great job for you. You remain in second. Joe is.
I believe I got a perfect score.
You did, yeah. You did
across both results.
Completely? I can't remember. Yeah, I think so.
You did. You got both. Yeah.
Got zero completely.
It happened on the week I wasn't here.
Discussion.
No one would have mentioned this.
There was discussion of like kind of knocking off points as an extra bonus prize for getting a perfect score, but they decided against it, which means that Joe remains top. Funny how they came to that conclusion. On 118, John in second on 122, Seb in third on 133. And JJ on 155. Who's picking the games this week then? Maybe, you can do it. As a treat for getting a perfect score, you get to pick the games this week. Give me 2 matches.
We've got a Milan derby this week.
Ooh.
In the Coppa Italia.
Is that midweek or next weekend?
It's Nonny midweek. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
And we've also got Chelsea Spurs, which feels like a fun match. I don't know why it feels like a fun match, but it feels like after a long time of not having Premier League, I'm sure both fans of both teams will feel as though they're in the pole position to maybe do better than they did in the last few games.
Could also be a
which
terrible
makes this
game.
a bit of a
that.
chaos derby, so I've gone for that one as well.
Okay. So the Milan derby in the Coppa Italia, you say. JJ, let's get your prediction for that.
Who is at
Milan
home? Sorry to interrupt
3-2.
everyone. Sorry, JJ. Who is at home in that Milan derby?
Oh, yeah.
AC Milan.
Well, they're both at home, aren't they?
Yeah.
Technically.
Well, it's a cup game. so-
Technically, Steve, I think you'll find they both play in the same stadium.
And it's not
Milan, it's a Milan.
So it's
home
AC
fixture.
Milan at
AC
home
Milan.
against Internazionale. Okay.
But JJ, let's get your prediction for that, please.
3-2 to AC Milan.
Nice. John?
3-2 to Inter Milan.
I will go...
I don't even believe
I'm
that.
Joe this week. So I will go for 1-1
1-0. Yeah, 1-1. Yeah, do you not have
at
to
90
go for...
minutes. At 90 minutes. Surely, if you include cup games, you judge them at 90 minutes, right?
Well, it used to be the fact that in the Euros you had to pick a winner from penalties if you went for a draw. And if you didn't get it right, you lost your points or something like that.
I'm
So-
already waiting for next season.
Yeah, you're at the beach, I believe.
Yeah, I'm fully.
All right, well-
Are you on the beach or just simply observing it? From
God,
a
I
distance?
wish.
Okay, well, as Joe, I will predict 1-1 with the caveat of Inter will win on penalties if it gets there.
Lovely. So just because there's, again, literally no one else here,
Yeah.
I will take up Seb's mantle, which obviously
yes,
with a
of course.
perfect score is quite the one to carry on. So AC Milan against Internazionale. I'm going to go for a
Internazionale.
a
Football friend.
2-0 away win.
For
And progress
Inter.
to the Coppa Italia
For
final.
Internazionale.
Internazionale.
Okay, cool.
Have we done the other one yet?
Game 2,
Oh, okay.
which is Chelsea Spurs.
Chelsea Spurs.
We'll
Chelsea
go in the
at
same
home.
order. JJ, Chelsea Spurs.
Who's at home? Chelsea.
Chelsea.
4-0 to Spurs.
Wow.
Wonderful.
I will go. I went high on the last one, so I'm going to go low on this one. 1-0 to Chelsea.
Okay, 1-0 Chelsea.
Can I try to embody the spirit of the person I'm playing as every week. Now, can I go 1-1 again
Yes.
for Chelsea Spurs? Yes, I'm going to do that as Joe. Because that's what he would do.
But now what you have to do is try and defend that by saying that it's actually what you think will happen, and it's not because you know that it's the easiest way of winning the game.
Well, they're both rubbish at the moment. Both teams are a bit meh.
Yeah.
It just stinks of 1-1. I don't back either of
Eggy, I
them
believe,
to...
is the term that
Eggy.
Joe uses. of
Okay,
these
yeah,
games.
they are a bit eggy at the moment. Cole Palmer's not been at it recently. Chelsea, I just can see a 1-1. I can see a 1-1. It also happens to be the best way to play the game. And Steve as Seb.
Oh yeah, Seb's a Spurs fan. Forgot about this. So what would he do? He would probably actually no. I
You're
know
not going
that
to give
he's
Chelsea
not
their full
enjoying.
name. Is it like Chelsea Nationale or something?
Well, I'm not going to give Spurs their full name at all. Tottenham.
What do we think of Spurs, Steve?
Oh, boo.
Right. Okay. Chelsea versus Spurs will be, I think, a 3-3 draw.
Oh, wow.
Lovely.
Spirit of the game.
I hope so.
I feel like Joe might be in a considerable lead after this week.
Yeah, and they'll have me to thank for it. I think that's all we've got time for. I apologise to John and the viewers that we didn't get to speak about Adam Wharton.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk about Adam
Yeah.
Wharton. Can we talk about him in the intro?
All right, well, I think that's about it for this week, which leaves me nothing to do but thank JJ Bull.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
There's no podcast next week because Steve's on holiday. Selfish. But it's going to rain, so joke's on him. Thanks for watching or listening. Goodbye.